Oh, hey, it's you. Welcome to the Black Pill. I'm not wearing black today, so you might not recognize me. Hey, it's me, Professor Blackpill. So let's talk about what are we on? Bad faith debate tactics, right? So today's bad faith debate tactic is the destruction of language. All right, so again, my memory isn't so super good, and I'm not going to pretend not to be reading notes. But here we go. An ex friend tried to convince me in an online argument, like back before we knew those were totally futile and should not be engaged in, uh, before we all knew better, that Catholicism, his Catholicism, was a logical choice, right? The old thing that science is a religion and I'm just choosing between religions, and I like that, he lost that argument in public because his position was weak. So a thing that we've learned kind of from the political pundit class is, and this is a valid thing we've learned, when the law is on your side, pound the law. When the law's not on your side, pound the table. And there was a lot of table pounding going on because his position was weak. It was very noticeable. And he resorted to a lot of the tactics that I'm trying to explain to you, a lot of quite toxic ways of appearing to be right when he was wrong. And he ended up alienating, actually, quite a lot of people. By the end of this argument, we could not agree on the meaning of the words religion, faith, science, logic, Catholic, or Christian. Whenever I used a word to mean something, he would whip out his online dictionary and he would cite, he would quote the part of the definition that made my argument seem to be invalid, that supported his alternate use of the word, disregarding the fact that there's all kinds of definitions for most words. And like disregarding the fact that when I said this, I clearly meant this thing, right? He's taking away, um, he's taking away language as a tool to accomplish anything. Wittgenstein, after writing the 400 billion word long treatise Tractato Logico Philosophicus, uh, pretty much disavowed his writings in philosophy, calling them ultimately meaningless word games, right? So language is tokens, and language has value as long as we agree on the meanings, the values of the tokens, right? So we're Vikings at a counting table, and I have swords and you have grain, and we agree this token is 3 swords and this token is 5 sacks of grain, right? And we swap those back and forth. That's only valid as long as we follow through on those agreements. And when you've agreed to trade 6 of these for 5 of these, that materializes in the form of the thing in itself, the Ding an sich. Um, and in language, when we're talking at cross purposes, right? Uh, uh, it's absolutely predicated. Language and argument is absolutely predicated on words having some, not necessarily concrete and objective, but agreed upon, negotiated value. This is a fairly common tactic in a fairly common argument. For example, see my 1 minute busts of apologetics, especially the one about Pascal's wager. There is no good reason to believe in God, but the wagerer will say, yes, there is a reason. Failing to believe means that you will be punished. But here we mean two different things by reason. I mean, there just isn't affirmative evidence that makes God necessary or sufficient as an explanation for anything. The wagerer means something more pragmatic, self interested than that. They imply an authoritarian system in which belief is dictated from outside. You believe whomever has the power to hurt or reward you. And I'm calling out this very specific equivocation because this is authoritarianism. Not just you do what the person in charge says, but you believe what they tell you is true, even if it contradicts the evidence of your senses. Think of Rudy Giuliani saying, the truth isn't true. Think of, what's her name, the weird lady from the White House saying he gave alternative facts to that. Think of Trump himself saying, what you see isn't real. What you see isn't what's happening. Equivocation now. Equivocation is the logical fallacy of using a word in a different sense than intended over the course of an argument, right? At its most, at its least malevolent, something like, oh man, I don't have time for that. And then the other person goes, wait, but it's a 15-minute task and you literally have an hour. You literally do have time for that. But then I go, well, I have time, but not for that, right? So here we're changing the meaning of time for the literal meaning, there is time to accomplish the thing, versus a different meaning, I don't value the task sufficiently to give that much time to it. Coffee. How are you doing? Because I'm running pretty much on caffeine and spite at this point. Debaters in our age, with whole television networks and brigades of followers online to amplify and enforce their messages, can take this to a whole new extreme. By dissolving language itself, they make argument impossible. They make argument impossible. We don't agree on the values of the tokens. As we get siloed into camps that possess whole different reality sets, perceptions of reality, we also have completely different languages. I'm going to keep referencing this Ken Ham debate because it's a wonderful example, a prototype for almost every bad argument, including the way he dissolves language. Ken Ham insinuates that science is a secularist conspiracy and religion is the real science. Answering the unlaid charge in this debate that creationism doesn't lead to scientific progress, he asserts creationists are great inventors, as though building things were science. It might be a science, but it is not science. You see that trick? We substituted one value onto the token for another value. I mean this, but you're demanding that. But it isn't science. That's at best engineering. And no shade on engineers. Engineers are often better at science than I am, but their profession is not science. Building a better mousetrap doesn't require any theoretical framework at all. The mousetrap just has to catch mice. In 2015, the Trump campaign was supported by online brigades of fake news mongers. Breitbart was the biggest, the newest of these, an outlet that looks like a news agency, functions like one, has journalists and editors and all of that, but is in fact no kind of news outlet. As responsible people started to notice fake news and try to rein it in, call it out, educate about it, Trump himself started using the term fake news to mean actual news. Anything that did not praise him and amplify his distorted truths was fake news, as far as he was concerned. What this does is make communication between our camps all but impossible. if I try to talk to a fundamentalist religious member or a right-wing Republican, honestly, those are much the same thing now. Well, the words I use are already twisted around. I actually put "well" in the script right there. I hate when people do that, and I did it. I wrote down like a spontaneous verbalization. It's so stupid. Pretend I didn't do that. But the righties, they can't hear what I'm saying because I'm offering this token with a value attached, and someone else has previously attached a different value to that token. So they're hearing scare words and threats, and I'm already in an out group and not to be taken seriously. It's possible I can't hear what they're saying. I accept that possibility. But I'm not convinced that there's a lot of content to their conversation. Anyway, the evidence is pretty strong that most far-right communication is affective right now. So Trump, if you transcribe the things that he says in his speeches and you run it through textual analyzers, he's speaking in about fourth grade terms, right? So if it was written down, a fourth grader could read it and understand. And the things that we're trying to talk about are complicated. They can't really be said in fourth grade language terms. You need some specialized vocabulary and grammar and whatever. So him and like all of his sort of ilk, they're not really doing primary route persuasion where we're persuading with facts and logic and data. We're doing secondary or affective communication where we say Democrats in a sneering tone and add a bunch of like implications and dirty words and stuff, classical conditioning, so that group is outgrouped. And there isn't necessarily a reason for that, except that they disagree. So most of far-right communication right now, I mean, that kind of evidence, right? Textual analysis, but also brain scans. If you activate people's limbic systems, they make more conservative decisions. If you measure people making conservative and progressive decisions, progressives are using their frontal lobes as well as the rest of their brain. Conservatives are using their limbic systems, right? So the evidence is fairly strong at this point that most far-right communication is affective, secondary route communication. It's fear and it's anger, it's sneering, it's deriding out groups. So you're in or you're out. And the reasons you would be in or out are, and always have been, ultimately pretexts. I mean, the pro-police party beating actual police officers with flagpoles attached to actual American flags, the guys carrying the Blue Lives Matter flags are beating up police officers on January 6th at the Capitol. I mean, come on. The party of veterans and soldiers and POWs hates John McCain because he was captured, because he was a POW. It was always a pretext. Always a pretext. Anyway, and for what it's worth, I've provided a list of right-wing double talk for your edification. I am really gonna belabor this point. This horse is dead, and I'm gonna flog it some more. There just might be no point talking anymore. That's a scary position to be in, but you just can't reason people out of positions they didn't reason themselves into, even with a whole functional language. And this group, this far-right sort of maelstrom of fundamentalist religion and authoritarian politics has just become so insular that it just might not be reachable anymore. Again, I realize what I'm saying, and that would be a really fairly terrifying proposition. I hope we can outvote them in later this year. All right, so, I mean, let's just read this list. I have time. Do you have time? Let's just go through it. I'll also try and remember to post it. But here we go. Christianity. There are lots of groups of people that call themselves Christians. There's a lot of sects, as it were. And they have disagreements ranging between minor and major, and different groups might not consider the other groups to be Christian. But for the right wing, in right wing double talk, Christianity means the Ten Commandments and the Second Amendment. That's what Christian means. The Constitution is a deeply revered document that can be interpreted in whatever way suits Republicans. Federalism, a symbol to invoke whenever someone gains more freedom as a reason to call back that freedom. Everything's unconstitutional if it disagrees with what the chief, the big boss, says. Democracy is when Republicans win elections, fairly or otherwise. Cheating is when they lose. Diversity is weakness. Education is indoctrination. That goes both ways. Real education they'll call indoctrination, and indoctrination they'll call education when it's their indoctrination. Emotional means sad and feminine, right? We can't elect a woman president because she'd be too emotional. But like Trump doesn't have emotions, like he's not in a fury, in a pissing fury all the time. Is that not an emotion? Like, come on, man. Fake news is any inconvenient facts. Equal rights is special rights for people you don't like. Literally, in my home state, in Colorado, in the early 90s, there was a ballot initiative that passed a constitutional amendment to make it explicitly legal to discriminate against people based on their sexual orientation. And the rallying cry for this was against special rights for the gays. I don't make this stuff up, people. What else? A fascist. Fascist is the law when it catches up to your people. The First Amendment is unrestricted access for Nazis to take over all social media. See my previous video. Did I do a video on this? When Nazis are allowed to speak, only Nazis are allowed to speak? I feel like I did, but you'll have to go through the things and find out. Free speech is the N-word on social media. Freedom is conservative identity. Gay is pedophiles. I don't believe that. Conservatives believe that, or at least say that they do. Gender ideology is something the left has, right? Traditional gender norms would be not an ideology. It absolutely is an ideology. Geopolitics is a distraction. Grassroots means organized covertly. Brooks Brothers riot, for example. History is propaganda. Homogeny is strength. Identity politics is it's the Nazi definition. It's when disenfranchised groups are asking for civil rights. This camera is having a focus problem. Let me slide that in right there. See if that's any better. Shall I hide behind my skull mug? All right, here we go. Ideology would be something the left has. Immigrant would be cockroaches. Invasion, when people from countries with poorer conditions try to come to America. The law is a weapon to use against political enemies. Liberal is anti-religion. Love is conformity and obedience. Nazi, anyone you don't like. And they'll throw that at me. You know, Nazi, you mean anyone you don't like. I'm like, no, bro, that's you. That's the way you use the word. News is propaganda. Oversight powers is a propaganda opportunity. Patriotism is nationalism and xenophobia. Politics is anything you don't want to talk about. You know, don't bring your politics here. Populist means racist when right-wingers say it. Racism is accusing white people of racism. Racist is authentic. We love him because he's so authentic, even though he lies all the time. Radical Radical leftists would be anything that helps regular people. Rational is angry and masculine. Regulation is limitations on capitalism. Religion is conservative Christianity. Religious liberty is using tax money to fund private Christian schools. Science, see fake news. Self-defense is when you provoke people into fighting back and then shoot them. Sex equality is traditional marriage. Socialism is any policy to the left of Hitler. Tariffs is a way to stick it to foreigners. Taxation is theft. Trans is perverts trying to get into the bathroom with your daughters. Treaties are toilet paper. Unconstitutional means helpful to people, especially if it protects people from corporations. A veteran is someone who served in combat or only claims to have and supports Republicans and was never captured. Voter fraud is black people voting. Vulnerable is weak. Welfare is deserving white people paying taxes to support undeserving people of color. And woke means traitorous and silly, part of the outgroup. Right? This is the glossary of right-wing double talk. And this is why you just cannot talk to just the hardest hardcore of Trump supporters and brigaders and far-right fundamentalist religious advocates. The language doesn't mean what you think it means. They've destroyed the value of the tokens and substituted their own. And 1984 has been cited so many times over the last 8 years. I'm not going to cite it here, but those citations are correct, except when Nazis have destroyed and distorted them. All right, so that is the unfair debate tactic of the destruction of language taken to this super far and upsetting extreme. I've been me, you've been you, and see you in the next video.